The Indian government itself replies to Rihanna, which was completely unprecedented. Usually the Indian government will only reply to like other governments, but I mean, it is Rihanna. They are basically defending the laws. It's only a small group of people that have a problem with these laws. Meanwhile, millions of people are protesting. Like they are lying to the Indian people's face. They are lying to our face. They're lying to Rihanna's face. Everybody's lying to everybody's face. Hello, everybody. How are you doing on this fine, whatever the day of the week it is today? I'm doing quite well. So today's video, I wanted to talk to y'all about an issue that is a little bit near and dear to my heart. And I've wanted to make a video about this for a very long time. Every time I sit down to make the video though, I just don't feel like I'm really doing the topic justice. And so I kind of pump the brakes and I do other things and I just haven't been able to cover this story and tell y'all about it. Well, long story short, I still don't really think I'm going to do the topic the justice it deserves, but hopefully what I tell you today will inspire you to go look into the topic yourself and maybe learn some things that you didn't already know in order to become a more well-educated world citizen. So today's topic is going to address the Indian farmers' protest. Now, if you don't know this, it is the largest protest known in human history. So, quite literally, millions of people were involved in this protest, and it was a huge deal. In order to understand what the farmers were protesting, we do have to go back in history just a little bit. So, India actually was colonized and controlled and ruled by Britain until like 1947, when basically Indian people had finally just had enough of not being in control of their own government and not being in control of their own world, that they started to fight for their rights back in the 1800s. Now, it wasn't until 1947 that India finally gained its independence. So, in the years between 1947 and 1960, there's a lot of transformation and transitions going on in the years following 1947 after India gained its independence because it had been under British rule for a very long time. By the time 1960 rolled around, there was famine all across India and people were hungry, and people who were already farmers started receiving a little bit of help and stipends from the government and from the United States to grow their own food. Now, the 1960s would bring in what would be called the Green Revolution. So, in the process of these Americans teaching Indian farmers how to grow rice and wheat so that they could feed not only India, but later on they would have a surplus and they would be able to export rice and wheat to the rest of the world, including the United States. In the process of all of this, they started to use these more industrial, commercial types of farming processes that used fertilizers and different types of tools that basically stripped the ground of being able to grow any other type of food other than some places still were growing lots of rice and wheat. So already like way back 50, 60, 70 years ago, however long ago it was at this point in the 1960s, we were already able to see a little bit of red flags that this was not a sustainable farming model. But alas, as we do, capitalism takes its toll. Cash is king, cash wins. And that's basically what these farmers end up having to be relegated to. Up to 50% of India's entire population is agricultural workers and farmers. But in particular, in the northern Indian state of Punjab, like 80% or 90% of the people living there are farmers or agricultural workers. Now, 50% is a huge number when you think about the fact that 1.2 billion people live in India. So it's hundreds of millions of people whose literal lives depend on being able to grow this food and to grow these crops and to sell them. Now, during the Green Revolution, there were a number of statutes and laws that were put in place to kind of incentivize farmers to grow food. Because, like I said, back then they were kind of hungry, they needed food. So there were these incentives that basically were there as a safety net for farmers and for people who were going to be growing this food in order to incentivize them to actually do it. One such incentive was that the government itself would purchase some of these crops from the farmers at a minimum market price. Now, this minimum market price that the government would pay was referred to as MSP. I think it's like market standard price, minimum standard price, something like that. But basically, for the purposes of this video, what you need to understand about this MSP price is that it set the floor for how much money you could pay somebody for their crops. And having that floor allowed farmers to have a little bit of insurance, right? They could take out debt in order to grow their crops because they knew for sure that they would get a certain amount of money per pound or kilo or whatever for their crops, right? So, since those laws were put into place back in the 60s, as the years have gone by, each individual state in India has been left up to their own devices and have been able to sort of regulate themselves within a state by state basis. We were able to see, like, say back in 2006, that these markets were eliminated in the Indian state of Bahir in 2006. Read my notes. So in 2006, those markets were eliminated in Bahir. But by 2013, the poorest farmers in India were from Bahir. So we were able to see a little bit how it was going to go if we just went ahead and ripped out the floor from underneath all these farmers. They would become poor. Something else you should understand about the context here is that there is already a huge problem with, for the purposes of YouTube, I'll say farmers unaliving themselves, and most farmers are responsible for families. So when these farmers were unaliving themselves, they were leaving families. It was a whole thing. Most farmers are in debt. So there's already a very big financial constriction on the farmers. We've already seen a red flag over there in Bahir that when we took away those markets from that state, they eventually 67 years later would become the poorest farmers in India. And so it's kind of like, all right, the government does need to step in and do something, but definitely not taking away these markets, right? Because if the farmers don't even have that minimum standard price that they can actually depend on, they could go into more debt. They could be able to not pay their bills at even greater rates than that's already happening. And then more farmers might end up unaliving themselves. So if you care about the farmers, if you care about their ability to support their families, if you care about their families, or if you care about their ability to actually grow and sell the crops, then you should probably have been a little concerned that they needed some protections. So by the year 2020, about half of all Indian people in India were agricultural workers, and over half of them were in debt. Now, this is before any new laws came into place, right? There was also, like I said, an unaliving crisis where about 20,000 farmers per year, and this is just what's being reported, were dying by unaliving themselves. So it was already pretty dang bad. Farmers and families had been begging the government for reforms, and they actually got reforms. But what ended up coming down the pipe was nothing short of abysmal. During mandatory lockdowns for you know what, the government passed 3 separate farming laws, which are colloquially known as the farm bills or the farming bills. Now, each one of these bills, each one of these 3 bills, deregulated a certain component of the farmer industry in India. The first act established free, unregulated trade spaces outside of the already established markets. They were saying, we're still going to have the markets that y'all go and buy and sell and trade at, but we're going to also have these other additional markets, these other kinds of markets that the government's not going to regulate, and the prices can just decide themselves over there. The problem with the first bill, this unregulating the market spaces and putting them over there, was that it would allow for big, rich corporations and corporate players to come in unregulated, which would disrupt the currently existing and already precarious farmer situation. The second act was a framework for contracts on farming deals. Now, this act would deregulate the contractual relationships between the farmers and the people who were purchasing the crops, oftentimes big corporations. The problem with the second act is that it gave farmers basically no tools at all whatsoever to fight back against a big corporation that would maybe screw them over. One of these deals where they were selling their crops to the big corporations or to anybody. And we've already seen in the relationships between farmers and big corporations in India, there is a lot of abuse and there is a lot of bad actors in the corporate space. So, second law, no good for that reason and would actually just serve to make everything worse. Now, the third act had to do with the regulation or deregulation of storage of crops. Before the act came in, there was actually a government mandated minimum on how much crops you could actually hoard and store. So, this third act comes in and says, we're going to make the storage spaces unlimited so people can just, corporations can just stockpile as much wheat and rice and any other grain, any other whatever as they want to, and there's going to be no more regulation. The big corporations could afford to stockpile, which would further manipulate the price that the farmers could charge on the not stockpiled grains and crops that they were trying to sell on the markets. So, this is just a broad overview here today. I mean, I could probably get into like a 5-part documentary and all of this because I followed it as it was going on. But basically, the storage limits in the beginning were in place to control prices. And with no oversight from the government at all, big corporations would then just be allowed to dictate the prices because right now, outside of these laws, it was supposed to be the government minimum set price is the minimum you can get. But if you have all this deregulated farming business going on outside of the regulated space, then it doesn't really give farmers any true protections. And farmers were saying that it was actually not just these 3 laws that was going to, on the surface, hurt them. They said that in the long run, it would ultimately end up such that farmers would be forced into doing these abusive and unfair deals with big corporations with no ability to fight back, no regulation on how the corporations were able to abuse these poor farmers, and no ability to make money to support their families, which makes the unaliving crisis even worse. So it was just a huge mess. Our family is from Punjab, so I know a lot about what was going on there, but this was happening all the way across India. A lot of farmers in a lot of states, Haryana, a lot of farmers in a lot of states were upset about this. But basically, the government was like, too bad, so sad. This is actually going to help you. Basically, the government was gaslighting these farmers. They were saying, no, this is actually going to help you. And you're just too dumb to understand it, basically. And the farmers were like, no, we're not. We actually know exactly what the hell is going on. And y'all and the government don't know how to act. And you need to repeal these laws. And the government was basically like, no. So, long story short, what happens is a lot of the farmers, especially from Punjab and Haryana, which is like a neighboring state to Punjab, they started to ask their local state governments to help them fight for themselves. And I think from what I remember, they really didn't do that at first. So, all the farmers from across India, equipped with the internet, start saying, what we're going to do? We're going to go down to the capital city, basically like the Washington, D.C., if you're from the U.S., like they're going to go over there where they make the laws and we're going to protest and we're going to tell them why all these laws are actually really bad for farmers and we need to get rid of them. They do not need to be in place. Now, these laws were already passed. Like, this wasn't like, oh, we need to tell them don't pass the laws. Like, no. They were already passed. And when these laws got passed, a bunch of stuff already started happening, like that the farmers were predicting would happen. They saw the writing on the wall and they were like, no, we're not doing this. We are going to protest our government because this is a democracy. And they did that. So basically, these farmers get in their literal tractors, and a lot of the farmers are from the Sikh religion, and the Sikh gurdwaras, which is like the temple. Anybody at any time can go into a gurdwara in India and get a meal. So in order to prep all this food for all these people, there's all these huge pots and vats, and they have all that stuff. So the farmers go to their gurdwaras, they load up all that stuff, they load up some of their grains that they grew, they load up some tea, they get all their things that they're going to need, and then they go ahead and head to the capital city with their tractors. And we literally saw parades of tractors, like hundreds of tractors. Then it turns to thousands of tractors, and they're going on a convoy to the capital city of Delhi to tell them that these laws need to be repealed. It was a sight to see. But then along the way, the central government had instructed these smaller state governments to stop the farmers. So along the way, farmers would be going on their convoy, they would be going on their tractors, and then they would hit these huge roadblocks. They put trucks full of stuff in the roadway. They lifted bridges where they could. They put barricades up. And you know what these farmers did? They got out of their tractor. And they moved the stuff and they kept going down to the capital city because they had things to do. They had things to say. And no barricade was going to stop them. Now, at the time, it was like very anti-democratic because how are you going to stop somebody from going to protest in the capital city? It's like the place to protest. But no, these people were being harassed and abused, shot with water cannons. People, I think, even died on the way there. But eventually, they all end up in Delhi, where they're going to go into the capital center, into the city center, and to protest. Well, of course, they get there and the whole city's barricaded off. So they basically set up camp in their tractors all around the outskirts of the city because they just weren't allowed in. And once they were physically there, then the government started saying like things like, oh, okay, well, if you just nominate like, one person from each group of farmers, and then we'll all sit together and have meetings and talk about our feelings and stuff. And it's like, at the time I already knew, like by the time I heard about this, that just wasn't going to be what was going to be going on. They were just trying to placate the farmers, and the farmers, they played nice to the most part. I mean, some of them acted a little crazy, but for the most part, they were just literally protesting these laws. They wanted them repealed, and then they wanted to go back to farming or doing whatever they were doing in their life. I just have to celebrate my people a little bit because the videos of them in these little encampments are nothing short of inspiring. I mean, they had people out there cooking, they had people dancing, there were like famous celebrities coming and entertaining them. There were people sending in truckloads of things. There were some people that they would leave to go back home and do their home responsibilities, but in their place, they would send like their son or their daughter or somebody up to the protest. And so it was a big deal, and it was not ignorable at all by the Indian government. So the farmers are there, they're getting hard to ignore, but at the same time, the government doesn't want to budge. I mean, y'all, they already passed the laws. They're going to have to come and unpass them, like repealing a law, like that's going to be a big deal. You know what I mean? Like they really thought they had done something, but no, the farmers had other plans. The farmers then at that point began sharing videos across the world. And at this point, I mean, much like people in my family, people had left India and lived other places at this point. Like people live all over the world who have connections to Indian farmers. And so they start saying like people all over the world, me, Prem, our family over here in New Jersey, we're like, hold on. This is not correct. People are trying to send money, trying to donate money. People are trying to spread the word. And then like all these different celebrities start tweeting about it. Even Rihanna herself and Greta Thunberg tweeted about these protests. Rihanna herself tweeted about these protests. It kind of goes back and forth for a while because she gets involved. She sends out her tweet. And then the Indian government itself replies to Rihanna, which was completely unprecedented. Usually the Indian government will only reply to like other governments, but I mean, it is Rihanna. And they're basically defending the laws. And they say that it's only a small group of people that have a problem with these laws. Meanwhile, millions of people are protesting. Like they are lying to the Indian people's face. They're lying to our face. They're lying to Rihanna's face. Everybody's lying to everybody's face, trying to say it's only a small group of people. That is not true. It was millions of people had a problem with this. Then as a rebuttal, all these like Bollywood celebrities, which are deeply entrenched in nepotism, start to retweet the same exact tweet as each other in support of these bills, right? So you have Rihanna tweeting against the bills, and then the Indian government comes out and they're like, no, Rihanna's wrong. These people are terrorists. And then all these Indian actors that are entrenched in nepotism start tweeting about how, oh, we're for the laws. We love the laws. And then all the tweets are exactly the same. Like it's a copy paste tweet. So it's like, y'all couldn't even ask those famous people in India to like actually make their own tweet about the laws. Is literally a copy and paste, like propaganda to the biggest degree right in front of our very eyes. And look, listen, I don't want to sound like I'm picking on India. We have propaganda machines in the United States as well. In fact, some of the propaganda machine that was running in India was CNN, India division. And we know how CNN in the United States acts. They do not tell the truth all the time. So I'm not picking on India. I'm just telling y'all the truth. So then in a disgusting and vile twist, which will come as a surprise to no one, the hashtag that these famous Indian celebrities, these nepotism celebrities were basically trying to defend the government with was hashtag India against propaganda. And they put hashtag India against propaganda in tweets that were copy and pasted and shared by like a bunch of people. Same exact tweet, hashtag India against propaganda. So, I mean, the government is basically obviously telling them to tweet these things, which is propaganda, and using the hashtag India against propaganda. I don't know. I just thought it was funny and not surprising. And then whenever the hashtag India against propaganda, the government realized that these farmers were a big problem. And so Not only did they spray them with water cannons and put up all those barricades to keep them from going and protesting, which was their right to do, they also cut off the internet from the people in the protest. They like strategically attacked the internet access of the people to get their message out. Well, I mean, I don't guess that really worked too well because now, as of December 2021, about a year ago, those farmer laws were repealed. And so I'm very glad to report that the farmer laws were repealed, but I think it says something a little bit broader that I really want to drive home. The government had already passed these laws. They were passed. It was said and done. And the pure and sheer determination and grit of the farmers outplayed the most powerful people in the country. The government had every single resource at their disposal except numbers. And this is what we can really learn from the farmers. If we all add up together, we are bigger, better, and stronger than any tyrannical government and any propaganda that may be pushed our way. We can stand up together and fight for our lives. We can stand up together and win. And I think you should look into this Indian farmer protest story in order to see what other ways we can learn from them because they were successful. And I don't ever hear anyone talking about it. And I think it's because they were successful. You don't hear nobody talking about how millions of people gathered together and protested and won against a tyrannical government, which was allowing corporate interests to run the show instead of people's human rights. That's all I have really for today. Facts ain't defamation. Love you, mean it. Okay, bye.